People who make your kinds of arguments are always concerned with other people's safety.
I'm concerned with my own safety. Just so that people are aware, my physical, emotional life and livelihood is at risk from being here.
That's a line we should not cross. We should not allow the government to decide which words we're allowed to use. It's a mistake. I thought it was an axiom, say, of feminism, for example, that the personal was political. And isn't that that's a famous phrase, the personal is political.
Okay, the personal is political when someone is attacking you on a basis that is personal and that you can't change about yourself. That is political. And that's when people sometimes become politicized, is when they realize that no matter what they do in the world, there will be people who will continue to attack them on racist grounds, on gender and sexual violence grounds, and that's why people start to fight back, and that's why people object.
And your attempts to regulate my language use, and
I don't care about your language use. I care about the safety of the people who are being harmed.
I know people who make your kinds of arguments are always concerned with other people's safety.
I'm concerned with my own safety. Just so that people are aware, my physical, emotional life and livelihood is at risk from being here, and that's not true of everyone.
In comparison to mine, say.
I don't know about yours because I don't live your life.
You know perfectly well about mine.
I do know that you have tenure and that's one of the major ways that you're able to do this. But I just want people to be aware that trans and gender diverse communities, and especially people of color, are being targeted and threatened physically. So free speech is a great idea and equality is a great idea, but we actually can't have those conversations when people are not even able to be present.
I mean, basically, Jordan is arguing that this is going to create chaos and anarchy, and that it's essentially a Marxist plot that is there to sow violence and there to sow confusion and topple any kind of hierarchy.
Can I just jump in there for a second? Is that an accurate characterization of your view on this?
I listened really closely to that tape. Okay. I think it is.
Is it, in your view, has she accurately characterized where you're coming from?
It's not a transsexual cabal by any stretch of the imagination. Is it a cabal of radical left-wingers? Yes, it's a cabal of radical left-wingers, and they've been active behind and in front of the scenes increasingly over the last 30 years. And my estimation is that departments like Women's Studies have trained between 300,000 and 3 million radical left-wing activists, and they're making...
And they're all underpaid, so don't worry.
Well, they could pick higher-paying occupations if they wanted higher-paying occupations, but...
Because sexism does not exist. Are you kidding me?
Let's not get off topic here, folks.
When the suggestion is made that somehow if we have words that don't fit into something that we're very familiar with and that we've used to date, that chaos will ensue, that everyone will be confused. I don't believe that. There's no evidence of that historically.
I hear you, but there was no law obliging people to use the word
Actually, but there were laws to oblige people to change the way that we referred to black people, for example. You know, there was a time when there were any number of words that we now can only say as letters in polite company. And that evolved. Those things changed. When I was a teenager, people were still using those words.
So this is a natural evolution in your view?
This is a natural evolution, and chaos will not ensue.
It's a natural evolution, then we don't need hate speech law to enforce it.
But we obviously do, because we can drive social change, and it doesn't all have to lead to chaos, is my point. And I think that, you know, we have seen the flip side of Jordan's argument, I think, has in fact, we do have a historical record of that. So when it was left to others to name people, we lost Indigenous names. I come from, my mother's from Ireland. She was from a generation that finally got to learn her own language again. She couldn't even speak Gaelic to her parents because they hadn't been allowed to speak it. So we've seen the effect when people can't use their own language, when they can't use their own names.
Okay, let me get Jordan to respond to that. A natural evolution of things, Jordan. That's how it's being described.
Words are tools. Maybe that was one of the great philosophical discoveries of the 20th century. And that means, and people are always looking for new tools to operate in the world. And if you invent a good tool, like a new word, then people will pick it up just as fast as they possibly can. You really see that in English. But the words that are being required now are not good tools, and that's why people aren't using them. And so instead what we have is the use of force, despite the fact that that's being denied. Although we've already established that, at least in the opinion of one of the people on this panel, I'm already guilty of a hate crime, which is what I said I was guilty of when I made that video. Steve, the issue with the law is quite straightforward. The government is requiring us to use certain language. That's not the same as not using certain language. And it's a line, and this is the fundamental issue. This is maybe the fundamental issue. That's a line we should not cross. We should not allow the government to decide which words we're allowed to use. It's a mistake. And it's a mistake that strikes right at the heart of free speech. And the thing about free speech is that it's not the right to criticize your leaders, which is what people usually characterize it as. Is freedom of speech is freedom to engage in the processes that we use to formulate the problems in our society, to generate solutions to them and reach a consensus. It's actually a mechanism. It's not just another value. And you should put constraints on free speech with the, well, I mean, I think that the real problem here is that there's a concerted attempt being made by many people to subvert all values to the value of equality of outcome. And we need more than one value, first of all, if we're going to survive as a society, because you can't solve every problem with the same approach. But there are more insidious things, in my estimation, going on underneath. I mean, even the missive that you just read said that, well, even providing me with a platform, let's call it, to express my views, is something that shouldn't be allowed. It's like, yes, that's why I made the video. It was because many people are claiming that the expression of these sorts of views should no longer be permitted. And it's this view for now, but this is a minor issue in some ways compared to the larger issue that's at stake, which is our right to have discussions of this sort at all. Like, I mean, one thing that happened right when we started this was that there was an initial claim, for example, that there's no such thing as biological sex. Well, I believe quite firmly that if we continue on our present path at the universities for 5 more years, that's a discussion we will not actually be able to have on campuses.
Because it will be...
By fiat, I mean, the legislation already implicitly presumes that biological sex, gender identity, and gender expression, which we haven't even talked about yet, vary independently. That is simply not true.